is mostly directed at the coaches. I grew up in a household where my dad had lots of tools and I started to use them before I knew he was teaching me things. But a lot of kids are growing up in homes, even in our age, but where some of this stuff isn't obvious. You're not building a robot here, but you've got to give them the right tools to do the job. Measure twice, cut once. Evan was our poster boy for that. He forgot the part at home. I think he did it on purpose. This is 8 pieces of plastic bent like a bent wood rocker, laminated together to maintain this curve and to comply with that year's arcane rules. Many hours to bend that piece, only a minute or 2 to cut these 2 grooves out to make it fit the robot. Of course, it's all wasted if you cut one of the grooves out the wrong side. So, measure twice, show it to a teammate, have them approve your work, then go cut it. So, pilot holes. We had one of the guys who volunteered to run and drill some holes and Swiss cheese the bar to make it lighter, except he didn't know that if you're drilling a hole this big, you ought to use a pilot hole. So, and I usually just send them off to do this stuff, but it's the things on this list that you're going to have to figure out if they know, and a bunch of other things, and then teach them. Tinning wires, using a jig in a drill press so the holes come out the same every time rather than just aiming. Using a fence with a saw. A saber saw will make a nice straight cut if you strap down a fence to the piece of work. File, sand, polish. If you look at any of the kids' final robots, they may look rough, but if you put your hands on them, you won't feel a single sharp spot. Good work should just be that way. It's going to impress the judges. It's going to be easier on you when you're working on the robot. It's going to be easier on an FTA or a ref when they have to reach into your robot. Nathan, you want to talk about heat guns?
Yeah, so torch or heat gun, this is the real question. So the torch, basically, instead of heat, it's a fire, so it's heat. Yes, it's true. So I think it was a Lego axle for something, and we decided, okay, we need to bend this into shape. So normally we use a heat gun, but heat guns are kind of terrible because they take a while to heat up. You gotta let them sit there. And Sean decided, well, I'm going to speed things up. So he took out a torch and he tried to use that to melt it into place, basically. But it caught on fire and it fell in the trash can. So he runs out of the room to get water from the sink. I walk upstairs and I look and the trash can's on fire in the middle of the garage. Then he runs in and he douses it with water. Also, he can do it a little bit faster. So keep in mind, use the right tool when you should.
Don't worry, the house didn't burn down. I saved the day. It smelled pretty bad in the garage for a while.
Evan showed how we bend plastic with a jig. Again, we don't try to bend it by hand. We find something, the shape we want to make it, and then we bend it to that shape. If you take a look at this ring cup, all these curved pieces here, the flat curved piece is done, the kids cut a jig for the plastic, a male and female jig for the plastic on a laser cutter, softened up the plastic, laid it inside the U, and then shoved the center of the U down in on it to get these perfectly shaped ring cups. So again, just using a jig for bending your plastic. Precise drilling. Hopefully some of you guys did a little double drilling earlier. You use a Tetrix piece as a template to drill Tetrix matching holes. So we offset them by by half a screw hole, and then drill an additional set of Tetrix holes in all these screws. So it's just using a template. Chain around sprockets. Some of the earlier designs these guys went through, they'd have a sprocket and the chain might go by it like this, and they'd wonder why the chain skips. Well, you got to have about 180 degrees of wrap if you don't want skipping. So all these little things, you're going to have to figure out what you guys know and slowly start bringing them up to speed on this. But expect it, look at it, and don't be afraid to teach them these basic mechanical concepts.
Maybe can I throw one in?
Yeah.
If you don't have access to a 3D printer and you don't want to spend hours building something to find out if it would even work, we've had some success with a material called Instamorph, which is like little plastic beads, and you throw them in hot water and they like all glue together, and then they turn into like moldable plastic, and you can form them around things. Like the year with the rings, we made a cup out of it, and then once it cools down, it hardens into a piece of plastic that you can see, kind of work for you. We actually used it that year on our robot. It's like 20, $30 for a big bucket of the stuff.
What's it called?
It's called Instamorph.
This is really more for the newer teams and the coaches, especially if you're coming up from First Lego League. One of the rules in First Lego League is the coaches do not touch the robot. Okay, that's really not the rule in FTC. Obviously, that's the goal, is to have the kids always doing all the work. But especially if you're just starting out, the kids aren't going to know how to do everything. You are allowed to work with them, with the goal being they end up doing all the work. Our first year, I had to help them out. I had to teach them how to do some things. All right? We all, and it's really a progression. And in the mentor handbook, it talks about four steps. You show them, they watch. You show them, they help. They do it, you help, and then they do it, and you watch. And that's really a good guide to use as you progress through as you're coaching. Right? You can touch the robot, but you don't want to do all the work. But until you show them how to do something, they don't know how to do it. So don't feel like you have to be completely hands-off to start, as long as you're not doing all the work. Right? So it's a progression.
And you want to use common sense on safety there too. When these kids were just starting out in FTC, if it was time to use the metal cutting chop saw, they would mark the piece, I would cut the piece. At this point, they cut it, but they may not cut it unless there's another person around in case they were to get into trouble. Nobody in our group is allowed to work with power tools by themselves. But they can work on power tools now without me there. And torches without me there. But again, you gotta have one of your teammates there. 4 years ago, they would, if it was a serious power tool, they would mark it, and I would start off by showing them and cutting it, as Sean said.